All right, we are live. Jacob Berman in the house, History Valley. What's up, man?
I'm doing great, Derek. How about you?
Doing good, doing good. Good to have you with me. This was a last second jump on with me kind of stream because, Paul's your guy, man. You talk about Paul all the time. I'm glad to have you join me, man. Thanks for coming. Shameless plug for those who are watching from Myth Vision side, whether it's now or later. We've got the course, of course. I pinned that at the top. Me and Jacob did with Dr. James Tabor, Christianity Before Paul, Rediscovering the Jewish Movement of Jesus. Highly recommend everybody go sign up, and it helps out both Jacob and us at Myth Vision, but also subscribe to History Valley. I'm going to flex and just say this. I may have been doing like the whole scholarly interviews, but Jacob has absolutely taken this thing and said, let me show you how it's done. So you have taken this way beyond what I have done, and you have interviewed far more scholars than I have on your channel. Jacob, you deserve over 100K subscribers yesterday, really. And I hope that everyone watching from Myth Vision will go and subscribe just to understand the scholarship and the path and journey that we're both on. So again, thank you for being here with me, man.
Thank you for having me, Derek.
Of course. So we're talking about Paul, right? And
yeah,
we have ideas, and I'm sure the people in the audience have ideas as well, right? There's always some interesting ways to try and dissect this guy, oddities that pop out in our face that we've noticed. You've picked at some material we're going to go over today together. I want to just say this up front. Me and Jacob do this full time. You want your questions addressed, you want comments addressed, super chat them. We could use the help, of course. We have goals that are set. If I hit 50, I'm going crazy berserk, and I'm speaking in tongues in front of everybody. I'm going to outdo the Corinthians, bro. Paul's going to have to write a letter condemning me, okay? Let's just keep it real. But
oh yeah,
that's what we do. It's what we do, right?
I think where I'd like to start is I think what complicates any kind of research and into Paul's letters and trying to dissect what the historical Paul's agenda was, what he's doing, because there's a debate in scholarship, as you know, about how many of those letters are authentic, and
Right.
some, and we've interviewed some, that dismiss all of the epistles as being genuine, and they say that none of them are. I find myself pretty much in that camp, and the biggest problem is our best attestation. And we'll get to, of course, the hijacking part, but I just wanted to outline the big issue here that First Clement is our earliest evidence for a historical Paul, and he only knows one letter. Now, some try to claim that Clement knew more than one letter. While it's possible, he does not specifically say it. He uses the word epistolin, which is one letter or a letter. Whereas you can go to 2 Peter and it'll say epistoles, which is letters plural. So Clement does not use that word when he talks about knowing a Pauline text. He just mentions a text. He doesn't tell us the title of that letter either. Now, from what little that he does quote from it, he talks about divided parties, which is going to fit right into our topic today, in which Paul is in conflict with Apollos and with Cephas. Clement doesn't really get into detail about what the dispute is about. This is what's elaborated upon in the canonical letters, which I think were written not long after First Clement. And so we have to try to figure out what was the dispute about, and what do we mean by Paul hijacked Christianity? In what way did he hijack it? Is he altering the message of Jesus?
Right.
And what can we tell? What can we detect? What kind of changes did he make? And it's difficult to answer those questions, especially considering how many forgeries are in his name. It's very hard.
Come on. That's a big boo-boo, right? And I tell people all the time, let's be careful. Whatever your position is, whatever you think's persuasive, if you know people are writing letters in the name of someone that they're really not, wouldn't that raise more red flags on being more cautious about maybe thinking why do we think these 7, right? Anyone who's not already like going through, I guess, a PhD program on this and hasn't already been told what to think about this would approach us cautiously and go, well, hold on, even the 7 are, I'm taking my gloves off and I'm going to dissect them and really analyze these open-mindedly and not just accept because they have a similar language style in Greek or whatever, that somehow proves that these are actually by the guy. But
Right.
before we get to this whole, I think it's important just to paint the dispute and then have fun with different models, because you and I can talk about different models and different data, like the pseudo Clementines and others, that might back up some of the dispute and the problem that's right here out the gate. And I think we can just read Paul's letter, right, in Galatians, whether he wrote it or not. He got his revelation from direct revelation, and he goes out of his way, whoever the author is, to say Paul did not even go to Jerusalem. He went straight to Arabia, okay, contradicting Acts, where Acts has him go to Damascus and doesn't go to Arabia, then to Damascus. But he contradicts Acts here. And here Paul saying, I got this from no man. This is from the divine man himself. Christ himself revealed this to me. That seems to be his whole argument, so much so that he says, if any man preaches another gospel other than the one I'm telling you, let him be accursed. Like, repeats it twice. That's a way of emphasizing it, right? So whoever this author is, and we say it's Paul, for the sake of it, consensus says it's Paul, this message to the Gentiles, Christ crucified, lacking all the biographical details that you would hope and all of that, seems to be a bit contrarian to the other message we find in, let's say, James, which lacks any crucifixion or atonement theology or anything like that, and all the other stuff that comes along with it. I'll pause and just let you chime in, because I know you probably have some input.
When it comes to pseudo-Clementine recognitions, as I noted before and in the recent stream on my channel, that the pseudo-Clementine recognitions are mid-2nd century, so they are post-New Testament. But that does not mean that some material in it doesn't go back earlier. And scholarship has gone into that about the preaching of Peter material in the recognitions. Now, I tackle that issue in a different way, because in the recognitions, it talks about letters going back to Zacchaeus and Peter. In the portion that talks about the attack on James is going back to Zacchaeus, apparently. And
who's Zacchaeus? I mean,
Zacchaeus is a tax collector, and sometimes in later texts, he's confused with Matthew because of that. Or
the same way that they like confuse Matthew and Levi. Levi gets confused with Matthew, kind of thing.
Yeah, I was about to just take it into that direction because it's connected to the Levi thing. Yes.
Okay. Interesting. So, and just so people know, if you don't know, the pseudo-Clementine material we have that we can date goes back to the 4th for sure, even though the material is earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. It comes from the one we have comes from Trianus Rufinus. And he's living at the end of the 4th century, early 5th century CE. And he gave us the current text of the pseudo-Clementine recognitions. But the text itself goes back to the mid-2nd century, around 150, circa 150 CE. The Shepherd of Hermas talks about another Clement, and this one wasn't a bishop, but he is traveling to many places, just like the Clement in the recognitions does. And so I identify him as the original author of the recognitions. And he doesn't specifically, from what I can tell, he does not specifically start claiming to be a bishop until we get to, I think it's his letter to James, it's his so-called letter to James, where he starts talking about it. So it's something like that. There's one of these letters that he writes. I don't have it in front of me, but I do know I know in one of those letters he talks about this, and he starts claiming to be a bishop, whereas in the earlier text he's not claiming that. And so I think that's the reason why it becomes pseudo-Clementine, because originally he wasn't intending to claim to be the Bishop Clement that lived in 90s CE. But later on, as he continues to write, he shifts. And all of a sudden, he starts claiming that he was a bishop. And so that's the reason why it's taken a lot later to have been by Clement of Rome and been later identified as pseudo-epigraphical forgeries, in other words. So there's a kind of a development there is going on in Second Clement, if you want to call him that, Second Clement's thought process. And I do suspect he's the one that wrote Second Clement as well, a forgery in the earlier Clement's in the earlier Clement's name, even though they do ironically have the same name. And I think what's going on here is when you look at the Shepherd of Hermas, which confirms that, is he's taking advantage of the situation to backdate his text and say, no, it wasn't really me. It was the earlier guy that's more important than me.
Now, what is all this, as far as this material goes, though, how is this related to Paul? Like, get into the details.
That's exactly what I'm about to do. And this talks about, the material talks about Saul's attack on James. It's in book 1, chapter 70 of the Clementine Recognition. This is where it is.
Here?
Yeah, okay, that's it. So here's the deal. Saul's name was removed. We know that from a margin note in a manuscript. A later copyist, it looks like to me it was Tyrannus Rufinus himself, removed Saul's name from the text. But another copyist noted that an older material, an older version of the recognitions, it does name Saul as the attacker of James, the brother of Jesus. And so it's the reason why he's removed from the text is obvious. We don't want to make Paul look bad. So we want to get rid of the evidence that he attacked James, because that's not kosher. Whereas in Galatians, we get a different situation. Paul and James are just having an argument. There's no attempted murder, if you will, going on. Nothing like that. They're just having there's a heated argument going on between Paul and Cephas. Really, that's really what's going on. Not any kind of attack on James, but in the recognitions, he's trying to kill James and he leaves him for dead. Another individual, Dorotheus at Tyre, he's getting his information from a different text. That is Abdias of Babylon. Abdias says that Saul attacked James, left him for dead, and then another unnamed individual came in to finish the job with a fuller's club, and he brained James. This doesn't contradict the narrative we're being told here. If anything, it finishes it. And it shows that in the original scenario, Paul attacked James. There was no argument. He was going there. He wanted to kill him and be done with it. That's what was going on here. There was no argument. And I do think that's what historically happened. I think Galatians is, if anything, Galatians is sanitizing the situation. And so just to make it clear, I date the recognitions post New Testament, but I think Galatians knows Zacchaeus' material. So they're both pulling from the same source. And this is not hypothetical, because the recognitions tells us there were letters written by Zacchaeus. So this is not hypothetical. We're being told that there are texts composed by that man. I am not hypothesizing it. The text says so. In the same way, in Acts 15, you get a mention of the Epistle of James. And in our New Testament, there's an Epistle of James. So that's what I mean. Stuff like that. Although some will dispute if it's the same letter, but that's a discussion for another time. Anyway, in Acts, you have a story about Stephen. Some scholars like Robert Eisman get into this, and I believe Jeffrey Butts gets into this as well. And they point out, scholars like them point out, that in Acts, you have Paul attacking Stephen. Or let me rephrase, approving of Stephen's death. Other people attacked him, and Paul says that he approved of it. So in Acts, we get the attack on Stephen instead of the attack on James. because Acts does not want to talk about Paul attacked James above Jesus. We can't have that because Acts is all about promoting Paul, sanitizing Paul's character, making other people like Peter get along with Paul, which is one of the reasons why I think Acts knows Paul's letters. I think Acts is further sanitizing Paul than the letters already are. It's another level. And that's why I don't agree with the idea of reversing dependence, as some argue, although very few argue this, that Acts predates the letters. I think it's the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. So I get that. Like, and I wanted to actually lay that one out as a possible hypothesis for this show too. I was
Sure.
hoping that we would get into the consensus first. Let's start with what everyone typically agrees with as a model. That's what I was hoping to do. And then work out from there. And we could get into some of the more, like Paul's letters you think might be later, all of that kind of stuff. Because really someone watching this goes, well, you said Paul hijacked Jesus. And we're getting into the weeds about like a text that may be quoted by a thing that's going on in Pseudo-Clementine. Most people don't even know what the Pseudo-Clementines say about this dispute. And they might say, well, that's later. And I think if you just read Galatians by itself, just read Paul's own letter, whoever wrote this, you can't walk away and not realize the tensions there. I mean, it's so tense there at the very beginning. He's defending himself. He's saying, I got this message from no one. I did not go to any of the Jerusalem 12. I went to Arabia, went to the desert, and he explicitly wants to make it clear he did not confer with any man to get this message, which is why when a commenter in the chat said just earlier, Paul didn't invent Christianity, Jesus did, you can easily see why that conflation would happen, especially when you're already a believer, because you're told, hey, 27 books, these are our books, right? And you're reading it as an aftermath, looking back on the material as if it's all telling you one story. But what critical scholars tend to think, consensus-wise, is that you get these gospels that come after some, if not all seven. Typically, they go with all seven. Letters of Paul are authentic, and then the others that are clearly forged, or most likely forged. And in the gospels, you get a reflection, especially Mark, of Paul's theology in the mouth of Jesus, in the story of Jesus. So the question then becomes a very difficult one to cipher, because then you got to ask yourself, hold on, is this Jesus in Mark Jesus? What Jesus really taught? What he really believed? What the story of atonement that we're seeing? Or is this a Pauline vision of Jesus as a gospel? And so it already becomes problematic. Is this Paul or is this Jesus? And that rift, you kind of see it. Of course, you don't just kind of, you really get it spelled out in Pseudo-Clementine material, where it's not just like I confronted Peter to his face as Paul does in his letters, and they have disputes, and James is sending spies to spy out on Paul. What the hell's going on with James and Paul in these letters? It's even worse, where they're like accusing him, like you said, of murder, but then even more so is they're disputing his revelation. Seems like they're actually saying, dude, we learned from the guy. We were at the Rebbe's feet. Okay, the real guy on earth, not some vision that could have been a demon or a devil or a fake angel or something getting these in our head. This was a real tangible Jesus that taught us on earth. And so there's this divide between the Jerusalem church and Paul. That seems to be James Tabor's view. I would think James D.G. Dunn has an idea like this. I think Gerd Ludemann has something of this. I think Paula Fredrickson hints at this. In fact, I think Paula Fredrickson says something to this effect. In Paul the Pagan's Apostle, something to the effect of Paul's mission to the Gentiles was not a natural extension of Jesus's own ministry. It was a radical departure. Jesus's mission was to Israel. His parables are about Israel. His apocalyptic expectations are about the restoration of Israel's 12 tribes. Paul universalized the message in a way that Jesus himself never did, and if we take the synoptic evidence seriously, never intended. And when we read the opening of James, what's it say? To the 12 tribes scattered in the diaspora, or scattered abroad. You read like First Peter, in the name of Peter, the opponent of Paul. talking about to the 12 in the diaspora, all of that. So there seems to be something split here, Jacob. I want to hear your comments on that. What do you think?
Yes, and I think one of the ways that you can tell that the Gospels come after Paul is the look at the Eucharist in First Corinthians. And Mark is copying that Eucharist from Paul. Paul's letters are the earliest attestation of the Eucharist, while Luke's version of the Eucharist is much more like the wording of the Eucharist in First Corinthians. And Paul talks about other people preaching a different kind of Jesus other than his own. He's complaining about this in First Corinthians. So if he's joining the movement and being faithful to what the original Jesus movement's message was, why is he saying things like that? Why is he getting into an argument with Cephas in Galatians if he's following what they're saying? Why is he disagreeing with Cephas about circumcision? And so that's the problem that people that want to rescue Paul within the original Jesus movement, it doesn't really work, because then you're making a hash out of Galatians. What was the point of the argument if he's being faithful to the message of the original movement founded by Jesus, if he's getting into arguments with their very leaders, the core leaders that were part of the original movement?
It's the same problem, and I know that we're getting off topic if I say it, but either way, it's worth pointing out what happens in Islam. You know, you have Ali, who's supposed to carry the torch after Muhammad because he's family, but Uthman and Umar end up, carrying that torch, and it ends up becoming the companions of the prophet instead of the family dynasty. And I think James Tabor's on the money here with this. I think there's a rift, and there's an outsider who comes in with a very popular message that at least works among a much broader audience. The 12's Jerusalem's message wasn't going to work for the broader Greco-Roman world. And there's so many reasons to point that out, but their mission seems to be not for the Gentile world. It just doesn't seem like that's their target. You know what I mean?
Right. Whereas Paul is trying to expand.
Exactly.
Well, and really what I want to do is I should refer to as canonical Paul to distinguish it from what I think the historical Paul was really doing. But canonical Paul's text is putting it this way. That's how it's framing it. And the Gospels are remaking Jesus in Paul's image, so to speak, integrating Pauline ideas into the mouth of Jesus, including Torah criticism, anti-circumcision, all that stuff.
Right. So you're hitting something that could there have been a historical Jesus who's pushing back against some of the teachings of the rabbis? Sure. And that's what rabbis do, right? They debate. But it's oddly in cahoots with Paul. And I've got a script coming out soon where we're going to discuss some of the elements of how Mark seems to be using Paul. I got a wild hypothesis. You care if I throw it at you just to get your thoughts?
Do it.
Okay. We might get a little off the trail, but it's relevant to the overall issue. I think Mark's gospel is a Pauline gospel. And that doesn't mean that any author needs to agree with everything someone else says, but I think he is Pauline. One of the clues is when Jesus is praying in the garden and he says, Abba, Father. We read that in English and we're like, oh, Abba, Father. Yeah, we know. He says Abba, Father. And it's like, we don't realize he's saying Father twice, but in two different languages, one in Greek, one in Aramaic. And that only shows up one other place in all of the New Testament, in Paul. Paul literally uses Abba, Father. Same thing. So you have this linguistic connection between Mark and Paul, but then even further, I thought, let me carry this a little further. William Raday had the whole messianic secret we all have heard about. And then you have Dennis MacDonald, which shows there's this idea of delayed recognition in ancient Homeric hymn, all that kind of stuff you see where the gods hide their identity or they don't want the people to know. So you could take different paths on explaining Mark. But if you look at it as propaganda that is pro-Pauline and anti-12, anti-Jerusalem, it makes a lot of sense because the 12 are dimwits. They're knuckleheads. They never get it. For example, when you look at Acts, at least Paul, while he's a knucklehead, he's doing bad things. What do? They paint him as a hero. They have him as an evil villain who converts, and the story ends on a positive note for Paul, at least in the sense that Paul's a good guy, right? The 12 in Mark, though they're there and you can't erase them from the early traditions, obviously, they're there, but they never get it. They never get it, so much so that at the end, the angel tells the women, go and tell the 12, right, that he'll meet them in Galilee as he told them before. But the women went and told no one, for they were afraid. The 12 don't get the message according to Mark. That's why I think someone added an extended ending, of course, problematic, but it sounds like a pro Paul gospel that says, you know what? And I'm hypothesizing here, but you know what? The 12 don't get it, but there is one who does get the revelation. He understands, and his name's Paul. So what if Mark is anti-Paul and Matthew hates that? So Matthew, without name dropping Paul, has a passage in Matthew 7, I believe. I think it's in chapter 7, where he's mentioning these lawless ones, people who are telling you don't need to obey the law, when he says heaven and earth won't pass away. Not one jot and tittle of the law will pass, right? Those who obey the commandments, obey my law. And he says, you workers of iniquity, you'll say, I did this in your name, I did that in your name. I will tell you, depart from me. Is that Paul? Is this Matthew guy saying, I'm fighting back against the anti-Torah, anti-law message of Paul, and we're going to clap back? What do you think, Jacob? Sorry for throwing all that out there, but I think it's worth noting, you know?
Oh no, I think that makes sense, because what's happening is that there's internal contradictions in the Gospels, where Jesus is saying that he has not come here to abolish the law. He's come here to preserve it. The law, he was not going to change one jot or tittle of it. He's going to continue it, which is a direct affront to other things Jesus supposedly says according to the Gospels. And so how do you wrestle these contradictions? That's why I think Galatians is an important bridge between the bridge that connects the original Jesus movement and Paul's movement with the Gospels, because Galatians is the transition point, which you see in canonical Paul. For instance, it can't quote Jesus in support of Paul's message. It doesn't really do it. It doesn't quote Jesus to support Paul's message. It can't. The Gospels didn't exist at the time for this to occur. So in the Gospels, they supply a remade Jesus that Paul did not have, that the canonical writers of Paul's letters did not have access to at the time, because the Gospels did not yet exist. And so in the Gospels, it's integrating both the pro-Torah Jesus, and he's getting mixed in with the remade Pauline Jesus that we get in the Gospels. That's why you're seeing in these internal contradictions. You have Jesus on the one hand wanting people to preach to Gentiles, on the other hand calls the Canaanite or Syro-Phoenician woman a dog, and on the other hand he says he's not going to change one jot or tittle of the law. And so you have these mixed messages. What is causing the mixed messaging? It's the Pauline message that's seeping in and corrupting the text.
It is interesting. It is interesting. If you take, and as I mentioned earlier, what Paula Fredrickson was saying about the Gospels, Jesus's mission is to Israel, to the Jews. And they do keep introducing Gentiles along the way. Like, it's almost like he's trying to go out of his way to only focus on Jews. And no matter what he does, you get a centurion who pops in, right? You get a Syrophoenician or a Canaanite woman, like you said, pops in. You get various people who are non-Jews who show up. A Samaritan, if you get all the way to the Gospel of John. Matthew doesn't seem to be fond of the idea of Samaritans or of dealing with anyone who's a Gentile until after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So what do you do with this? If Matthew is clapping back at Paul and the 12 are not really teaching a crucifixion atoning theology like Paul, Matthew seems to still adopt some of that, though. So who knows how late Matthew's being written, but it seems like you said, his message has already seeped in. And if Matthew sees enough in Mark that he likes, and there's that theology, he might be adopting some, but also fighting back at the same time. I mean, there's something going on there. I see we had a super chat here. Solera night in the house. Paul never walked with Yahshua. or commissioned 12. Yahshua, or Jesus, left with scouts seeking path into wilderness for Exodus, with manifest gathered 144,000. Appreciate the super chat, my friend. Well, we know Paul never met Jesus. It doesn't seem to indicate that in the evidence. But again, this is the point. Jesus seems to be focused on Jews, Israelites. That was his goal. To the Jew first, though, Paul says, then to the Greek. And is he adding that in? You know what I mean? What's going on there? It's interesting to know.
I don't really have a comment on connecting it with the 144,000, but what I will say is, yeah, obviously Paul never walked with Jesus. It doesn't matter which text you look at. It doesn't matter if you look at the Clementine literature, New Testament, or whatever you're looking at. You're not going to find any evidence. But what I will say is, if you go to 1 Corinthians, and you notice that Paul makes this complaint about, there are those that are of me, Paul, or of Cephas, or of Apollos, or of Jesus. That's an interesting one, as if there's a separate Jesus. Bob Price notes this. And the way I look at the of Jesus is like it's an other Jesus.
Right.
This other Jesus is the one Paul is going against. You could look at that individual as the pro-Torah Jesus that James is following and Paul is going against. While Paul is preaching a remade Jesus, but he can't, or the canonical writers of Paul are preaching a remade, different Jesus, Torah critical Jesus, but they haven't really fought that through. That's why they only quote their version of Jesus like 2 times, one of them being the Eucharist, and that's it. And they don't really have a developed list of like, okay, we're gonna put this in Jesus' mouth. You're gonna quote him saying this to support what you're saying.
Right.
That's not happening. That's what the Gospels fill in the blanks. Like, okay, we're going to develop Paul's Jesus, but they're also integrating the other Jesus, the Jesus of James and Cephas. And that's why you're getting these conflicting texts. Whatever texts were available to the canonical writers of Paul was a text that was pro-Torah. It's a Torah preaching Jesus. And that's why they couldn't quote it, because it would go against Paul's message. It's self-defeating. So the Gospels make up for that. And I would say Acts tries to make up for that too. Acts reboots Paul's narrative. The vision of Jesus in Acts is even more detailed. Paul's vision of Jesus. You got Jesus coming down all the way to the ground to him. Paul's not being lifted up to the third heaven. Jesus is coming all the way down to see him. It's also, the chronology seems to contradict 2 Corinthians. It's happening 30 years later, rather than happening in the 30 CE. And he's fleeing from Jews in Damascus instead of fleeing from Aretas. So he's fleeing from different people now. So they shift the story.
This guy's got some problems, huh? He's fleeing from all sorts of people, depending on which text you read.
Right.
Solera Knight, thank you so much again for the super chat and being a member. Acts 1:11, this same Jesus who ascended above the mountain clouds will return visibly, meeting here in the same mountain clouds to establish the exodus from Rome, thus a new kingdom. I don't know about the additional, because my understanding of Acts, I'm pulling up Acts 1 right now. Specifically, the way I read Acts, and this is based on like John Dominic Crossan, the Hermeneus series, Pervo, other people who've actually written on this. And I'm just pulling it up now, just so we have it on.
While you do that, I want to note
Acts
that
1:11 is talking about the ascension.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say it actually says of Christ. The other, it's another Christ. It doesn't say Jesus, but still, my point stands. Go ahead.
Oh, you're talking about the other. Yeah. You misspoke and said Jesus instead of Christ. I understand what you mean in the letter. Hey, no worries. We misspeak all the time. It's normal. People make mistakes, man. It's life. No problem. Yeah, men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. The only thing I am questioning here is So you say, return visibly meeting here in the same mountain clouds to establish the exodus from Rome, thus a new kingdom. Paul seems to be heading toward Rome. And a lot of the academics I read actually think that Acts is intended to practically establish Rome as the central hub. So this is Pervo calls it a proto-Catholicizing text. He thinks Acts is literally trying to say the church is going to be founded in Rome. That's why Paul wants to head to Caesar. That's why he's trying to go establish the church in Rome. And he is the main guy. That's the only thing I would ask about this super chat, is the ending part there specifically. Also, Jacob Berman's got a super chat over here on History Valley, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Bustian. Did they have a comment, Jacob?
Paul said earlier, I tried to do a super chat question. Maybe I didn't do it correctly. No, you didn't. Yeah, you didn't. You didn't type it in.
Oh, here it is. There it is. There it is.
Well, thank you for another one.
Yeah. Paul says, I think that Paul's theology logically results in Marcions. Do you agree with me? Okay, Jacob, it's your super chat. I want to comment when you're done, though, if you don't mind on this. This is interesting.
My take, and I actually sent a little script of my take on Marcion abridging Luke to Derek, because he's working on a video on that subject. But what I think is going on here is I think Marcion is abridging Paul's letters, and he's trying to remove what he didn't like from the letters, just like he cut down Luke and subtracted what he didn't like from there. Let me put it this way. This is the simplest way I can put it. In 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16, you have Paul, canonical Paul, blaming the Jews for causing Jesus' death, saying that the wrath has come upon them for what has happened to Jesus and the prophets. And so I think that's 70 CE. That's the destruction of the temple. And some scholars even agree with that, and they try to say it's an interpolation, and then say, well, everything else in 1 Thessalonians, just not 1 Thessalonians 2:16, but everything else is pre-70.
Right.
Okay, I guess you can believe that. But anyway, what's happening is you go to Mark, which Mark talks about Jews pressuring Jesus into executing Jesus. Then you go to Matthew, which is, you can see the development, you can see the progress being in the development of the polemic against Jews from gospel to gospel in just a moment. So in Matthew, it's the crowd says, the blood of Jesus will be on us and our descendants forever. Then you go to Luke, and now Satan is possessing Judas Iscariot. Mm-hmm. So it's really taking the Jews conspiring with Satan to a whole nother level, because now in Luke's version of events, Satan is now possessing Judas Iscariot. And then in John 8:44, what do you get? Jews are sons of the devil. And so they're trying to make it look like, especially when you get to Matthew, then going forward, it's starting to claim, oh, but they're working with the devil. And then you go to Marcion. You see my point here. You go to Marcion's antithesis. Marcion goes even further and says, actually, their God is evil, and Jesus is the son of a different, better God. You see my point here? So it's just a progress. You can see a progress, a timeline here where the criticism is getting turned up. The volume is being turned up over and over and over again, all the way to Marcion. And so I think you can see a logical development in the text there.
So may I comment on this super chat before we get to the next one? Because Solera dropped another super chat. Again, thank you, everybody, for the support on both History Valley and Myth Vision here. And this is a hypothetical thing, Paul, I don't know what to do with this. I love learning from the PhDs, learning from the different scholars, and being able to be open-minded in hearing all of them, not just one, and having to stick to my guy or my girl, and that's it. But let's pretend the reverse were true. And me and Jacob talked briefly about wanting to discuss this, just mentioning this on the stream. If Nina Livesey is correct, if Robert Price is correct, if the Dutch radicals, some of them, are correct, that Paul's letters are 2nd century, they were written later, and Nino, let's say, is accurate on Acts was written before the letters, which I'm just playing a hypothetical here. I know it's not consensus, but if you reverse the role, instead of saying that Paul Acts sanitized Paul. Imagine if the letters radicalized Paul for Marcion's cause. So imagine there was an early group, just hypothetically, if we reversed the expectation here, that Acts actually depicts Paul as joining along with and in camaraderie with the 12, with Jerusalem. He is a Jew who goes to synagogues. He's trying to preach the gospel to synagogues. He's talking to Jews. Occasionally, Gentiles and God-fearers are joining in the movement. And then someone later writing in the name of Paul in the school of Marcion, let's say, radicalizes and creates a friction. And to justify it, they say, well, he did not receive anything from the 12, so he breaks them away from the 12. He says, they didn't go to Jerusalem. No. I got this directly from Jesus or from the Christ. So now you can have a Paul that has become radicalized or broken off from the earlier movement, and that could be Marcion's cause. I don't put any weight on this, okay? I'm simply saying, what if? And if that is the case, then you can maybe try to see, why does Paul's theology work well within maybe Marcion's theology in some ways? Even then, though, Marcion scholars notice that Paul's theology does not oftentimes one-for-one fit Paul's theology. Does that make sense? What I'm saying, Jake?
I get what you're saying. And one of the things that Marcion does is he gets rid of the co-authors. Not to say that some of them don't show up. They just don't show up as co-authors, like Timothy, for instance. He also gets rid of Silas, Sophanes, and Tertius. Now, what happens when you get rid of those names? Because if you study Marcion's doctrine, Marcion believes that Paul is the only true apostle. So it's not a coincidence he ditches the other authors that are working with him. So once you ditch
see why
them,
he potentially would ditch the 12 even too in that case.
Yes.
And not saying he did, but you could see why, if you take my model, it could work. Sorry to interrupt. I just think it's important.
Oh, okay. So what I'm trying to say is, when you get rid of the others, what do? And by the way, in my view, this is a very strong indicator that the pastoral still existed before Marcion. Because Marcion would not want the pastorals. Why? Because Timothy and Titus would be getting authority. Paul is writing letters to them. That right there is a big reason he would cut them entirely. That he wouldn't even bother bridging them. And he does omit them in their entirety. The pastorals are not part of Marcion's canon. Marcion's collection, I meant to say. So what's happening is Marcion, by getting rid of the co-authors, he can then remove any other portion of the text he doesn't like and rearrange it, because you'd have to try to guess, which is what I try to do. You have to try to guess whose view is whose,
right?
Based on the contradictions in the letters. Like, for instance, I'll give you one brief example because it'll get complicated very quickly. But one easy example for everybody to digest is 1 Corinthians versus Galatians. In 1 Corinthians, Bob points out this contradiction, but for different reasons. In 1 Corinthians, did Paul receive the message from text? Did canonical Paul receive Jesus from text, or did he receive it from no man in Galatians?
Right.
Depends on which letter you read. Or it's because 1 Corinthians is co-authored by Sophanes. So once you get Sophanes out of there and you get rid of the contradictory material, because in Marcion's Paul doesn't really contradict himself, admittedly. But at the same time, the co-authors are gone. And when you get rid of the co-authors, everything that Marcion does is he cuts out the wrath upon the Jews in 1 Thessalonians 2:16. But he kept some of the rest, including the element in which the Jews are still blamed for causing Jesus' death. He keeps that in his version of 1 Thessalonians.
Interesting.
Yeah. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, this gets into all sorts of more like technical, what's missing in the reconstructions and stuff of the material. And I think a lot of people are interested in all of that. Let me hit the super chat real quick here. I don't want to leave anybody hanging. Stelera had an interesting one I was reading before we finished up with Paul here. Truly, I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes with path away from Rome with gathered. ? Right? And I think what he's implying here, and I'm getting where Stelera is coming from, is this idea that there seems to be two ideas, which is why you can kind of paint Paul might be going toward Rome, right? And the other group, the 12, were trying to get away from it. Jesus's message would have been like, nah, let's get out of here. Get the Jews, focus on Israel, regathering Israel. Do not worry about going toward Rome. And he quoted in the earlier super chat, just so we're on the same page, the 144,000, right? Well, anyone who reads, I think anyone who's not already indoctrinated in some form of preterism or something, is going to realize quickly, not only is the beast likely Nero, and we're dealing with, if it isn't him, it's imperial. Okay. It's a person who claims to be God, right? No Jew is claiming to be God. And I just say that because a lot of preterists have done that in the past. But even more so that Mystery Babylon is Rome. So here you have this prostitute who's guilty of all the blood of the saints and whatnot. It's Rome. Rome is the whore of Babylon. That is a huge deal if it's condemning Rome, yet Acts wants to paint a story toward Rome. So for me, you could see the friction going away from Rome and toward Rome, depending on the message, it seems. What are your thoughts? Do you think that makes sense?
Yes, I do, and you see this happening in the letters, because like Romans 13, and you can interpret it in different ways. So Romans 13, you have this thing about all governments are appointed by God. This is, as I pointed out before, I'll point out again. This is because of Deuteronomy chapter 32, when the Most High God, Ha-El Elyon, divided the nations according to the number of the gods, according to the DSS Qumran reading, which is the original reading. In this situation, you have God, you have El giving each god, assigning each nation a god. Yahweh was given, or Yahweh was given Israel as his domain, and that's why you have passages like Naaman literally doing a little mobile Israel thing, digging up Israeli earth and putting it in carts, so that way he can walk on Israeli earth in other people's countries, forcing God to protect him wherever he goes. Or David talking about how, hold on, Saul, don't push me out of here, man. I have to start worshiping foreign gods.
Yeah.
So you have passages like that. And then in Romans 13, Paul takes that situation, canonical Paul takes that situation and puts this particular spin. It says, because God appointed all the nations, all governments are working for God, basically. Rebellion against the government is insurrection against God. That's the way Romans 13 is putting it. So you can't rebel against any government that happens to be in control of your territory, which would include Rome or anyone else in the future who does control your territory. And so stuff like that would cause conflict in the Gospels. Again, you see passages like Jesus saying, I came here with a sword. Sell your clothes and buy swords. But in other instances, he's like, no, turn the other cheek. Don't resist. I'm like, well, which is it, Jesus? Shall we turn the other cheek, or do we sell our clothes and buy swords?
Right. No, you're right. Yeah, there's so much. It's like you can try to harmonize some of this stuff. I could see it happening. But again, there's some stuff that just seems difficult.
That's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Yas Calibri, thank you so much for the super chat. Who else did Jesus blind or give thorns to make them remember from where they came? None but Saul of Tarsus, that Herodian cousin of Herod of Antipas.
I'll tackle this. Okay, so I don't think the historical Paul was a relative of the Herodians, but the epistles do make it seem that way on purpose in two instances. Mostly in Romans 16, but it's implied in 2 Corinthians 11. From my point of view, because I date the epistles around about 97 AD, maybe some of them the year earlier, but I think I'm becoming more convinced they were just written in 97 AD primarily by the co-authors. It's pretty much simultaneously composed for the most part, except for 5 letters like Galatians, Ephesians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus. So the only 5 of the 13 Pauline epistles. I mean, not 14, because I'm excluding Hebrews. Doesn't claim to be by. It is not claimed to be by Paul. But those 5 letters I just mentioned a moment ago are not co-authored. But anyway, Josephus mentions a guy called Solus and his brother Chrysaborus. and they are brought before Emperor Nero in 66 CE. Their goal was to blame the kindling of the Jewish war, the big Jewish Roman war, the first one, 66-73 CE. They're trying to blame it on Governor Florus. And Nero's like, I can tell that Nero is not getting, it doesn't seem to be becoming convinced at that point, because we never see those two ever again. And the way that Josephus writes about that incident, that situation, is as if their lives were in danger, even trying to make that argument. And then around that passage, you get a mention of what was going on, the start of the Jewish war, as a whole territory going down like it's a sinking ship. He uses sinking ship as a metaphor. Let's keep that in mind in a minute as I continue as I finish my answer, because I think that's important. The sinking ship metaphor that Josephus uses. And so Josephus tells us that Salus and his brother Chrysaorus are kinsmen to Herod Agrippa II. So they are Herodians by blood. In Romans 16, it says that Paul is a kinsman to someone called Herodion. And if you go to 2 Corinthians 11, you get this thing about Paul fleeing from King Aretas. And who was King Aretas going after? If you read Josephus' text, he was making war against the Herods in 37 CE.
Real quick, just so I'm tracking you.
Sure.
If we just take Steve Mason's view, which I think he's correct, Acts is using Josephus. He knows Josephus. He's borrowing for his own purposes. For his own purposes. He doesn't always get the details right, as you and I know, but he's using Josephus. You're saying if we triangulate Acts and we look at Josephus and we know that Acts is using Josephus, you can internally, by Josephus standards, realize who King Aretas is going after and say they're Herodians, and therefore the logical conclusion in your mind is that Paul is part of or in cahoots somehow, whether he's family or something, with the Herodians.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is canonical Paul is reimagining the historical Paul in that scenario. Clement, okay. I want to make the point that Clement, both the genuine Clement, First Clement, and the pseudo-Clementine literature, they don't know anything about this. Paul's not a Herodian at all in the Clementine text.
Right.
This is a remake of Paul that we're seeing in the letters. They are reimagining Paul as a Herodian, but Paul's letters, just like Acts, gets things wrong too. And scholars debate about this all the time because they don't know how to wrestle with it. 2 Corinthians 11, King Aretas controlled Nabatea. Josephus never says this. He's talking about King Aretas IV. He never, I'm sorry, not Nabatea. He did control Nabatea. I misspoke. He never controlled Damascus. That's what I meant to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. King Aretas III controlled Damascus in the 70s BCE, a century earlier in time. So now, how do you resolve that?
Authentic letters? You're saying this is in the actual.
That's a mistake in 2 Corinthians, and several scholars have tried to explain that away. They try to say, well, maybe he tried to, maybe he controlled the territory briefly. They have to speculate, but they admit they don't have any evidence. There's no archaeological evidence confirming it. Josephus never says so. So 2 Corinthians makes a mistake. Acts, which makes other mistakes, actually corrects 2 Corinthians, ironically, using Josephus because of the Saulus character in 66 CE, fleeing from Jews. So it's actually getting it more right than 2 Corinthians does. But in order to do this, you have to move the flight 30 years forward in time.
Interesting. I didn't, I never saw that particular issue. That's interesting. The Acts would be paying attention. I think it knows some form of Pauline letters. But it's fixing this issue. That's an interesting one. I need to check that out. When we're off the stream, if you could send me some of that information, I'd really like to look at that myself.
That's going to be part of my Paul paper for Bob's journal. That's a big point in my paper. Big one.
You know, this is an interesting thing. You keep using canonical Paul, right? And I think to myself, what's Jacob mean by this here? And maybe viewers who watch your channel all the time understand. When I hear canonical Paul, in my mind, based on the consensus, what we've been dealing with for so long, is that you have, Acts, you have the canonical Paul is these letters in the name of Paul that are forged, but you've got like the authentic early Paul in the 7. But you're saying what we're reading in any Pauline text is canonical Paul, that they've
Yes.
already done redactions and tweaked this material we have. So getting behind
Indeed.
that is a whole nother job, you're saying. Okay, with that in mind, I want to make one comment. Then if you want to elaborate on the canonical Paul thing, feel free to super chat your questions. We will interrupt whatever we're talking about, keeping the lights on for the programs here, comments, questions, whatever. But I actually went in, I don't know if you saw it. You've been writing on the Journal of Higher Criticism. I went in and wrote an article with Bob, and we kind of hypothesized, like a speculative article. There seems to be indicators in the letters that this author, we call Paul, knows or hints at the readers knowing about the Gospels already. And there's no way to prove this, but I played a hypothetical and I said, imagine we read the letters of Paul and Paul drops a one-liner, just a one-liner. And I go through several examples, of course, in the article with him, but there seems to be hints at in those one-liners about a whole backstory that you can find a story in the Gospels about. And I said, what if the letters are complementing an already existing gospel that floats around that they know of, and it hints at the stories we already are aware of in, let's say, Acts or something like that. So again, it was using Nina Livesey's view that we were just speculating to see. I think Bob takes this view a lot more seriously in terms of actually drawing this conclusion, whereas I just did a thought experiment with him and I said, look at some of the hints in Paul's letters, like as if he knows this story back here. You, the reader, have already read this gospel or read this book of Acts. You already know this story, but it just one sentence. And I said, what's more likely? The book of Acts author saw a one sentence and said, I'm going to write a whole story about that. Or is it more likely that this letter is hinting at the story that already exists and he just does the one-liner? And I explain why I think that the letters hinting at the already existing story might make better sense in some cases. But that doesn't contradict your idea about canonical Paul, because let's say there was an earlier version of Paul that's not canonical Paul and doesn't have the knowledge of this earlier story. What if canonical Paul is written after Acts? What if that is the case? I'm just throwing it back at you to get your views.
The reason why I don't think that works is because if it is after Acts, it wouldn't have made that mistake about Aretas in 2 Corinthians.
And you know that Aretas part is canonical Paul and not earlier?
It's 2 Corinthians 11, 32, 43. I've been talking about it for years.
Yeah, so how do we know that's canonical Paul and not an earlier, Paul of something behind that?
I know that because Clement has no knowledge of it. Clement doesn't even talk about Paul's vision in First Clement. See, that material about the vision in Damascus is where that Aretas story is centered around. And you get the mention of the 14 years in 2 Corinthians. And the 14 years shows up again in Galatians. Clement doesn't talk about this.
So I guess I need to go back and read Clement and see how much he even covers of what Paul says. You know what I mean? Because
it's very
if
limited.
we're just using, that's what I was going to say. If we use him as the ruler of like what is before the text we're reading, how much of Paul at all is really talked about in there? And if it's not much, I don't know why we would gauge it that way. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll give you an example of what my problem is. There's two major contradictions between First Clement and the epistles that can't really be worked around. There's a mention of Fortunatus in 1 Corinthians. Fortunatus is mentioned in the second to last verse in 1 Clement. And 1 Clement has no idea that Fortunatus was even a contemporary of Paul or even knew Paul personally, which contradicts 1 Corinthians. Clement says that Paul died a long time ago. He never says he met Paul. And yet in Philippians, which even the early church fathers say, it's supposed to be the same Clement. Philippians portrays Clement's name as being in the book of life, and that Paul already knew about that. Well, that doesn't make sense because Paul never met Clement. Clement himself contradicts this clearly. He lived long after Paul's death. So that's a problem. It may not be much information, but even with what we're told, it's seriously contradictory to the letters. And again, he knew a text that contains some parallels to 1 Corinthians, but it's different. He doesn't know about the co-authors. The co-authors, Timothy, Silas, Sophanes, Tertius, they're never named by Clement. Even the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, even though it's post-New Testament, if you do a word search in a computer, in all 10 books, never mentions the co-authors. Not one time.
Yeah.
Anywhere.
So how do we know, like, all right, so as far as the scholarship goes on Clement, how concrete are scholars on that Clement wrote this in that time?
It's practically consensus, and they put it in the 90s, around 96
Okay.
CE. That is
Gotcha,
consensus.
gotcha.
Some are challenging that. I have a hard time swallowing that it's later, because how could the author of Clement be so ignorant if he knew our New Testament? In fact, he also says that Paul was killed by envious men, which contradicts the Acts of Paul, which was written many decades later, well into the 2nd century. And it
Yeah.
says that the Romans had him beheaded, but that was plagiarized from Josephus. Josephus talking about Saulus and Gustavus appearing before Nero in 66 CE in Achaia. That's what that story about Paul's death at the hands of the Romans is based upon. It was a different person that has been integrated as Paul.
So you think that the legend, if you will, of the beheading of Paul started as a Josephine Saulus character getting
Yes.
beheaded, and therefore you think,
just to be specific, Josephus does not say he was beheaded, but he did appear before Nero. He was in danger doing this, and that's it. He
they
disappears
say
from
he
the
get
story.
killed, or they don't tell you how he died or anything, or
They don't.
they tell you he died?
Josephus doesn't specify that detail, but he never talks about him nor his brother Gustavus again after they appeared before Nero. So later authors used that situation, that appearance before Nero, to create Paul's death before Nero.
So you think that's the text that they used?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm wondering how generic the idea of appearing before Nero might be, because I know that like Apollonius Satiana also appears before Nero, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, it may be.
I thought it was
Domitian.
Domitian.
Yeah, it might be Domitian. Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's a generic thing to have them appear before Caesars. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's something for me to look at. It'd be interesting to kind of think. And are there any other scholars who've actually looked at that and thought that's it, or they're just that's something you've kind of thought of yourself?
Not that I'm currently aware of. I think it's something more original to me. But one thing I want to mention: Cestius Gallus, the Roman commander that lost his army at the start of the war, does seem to appear in the Acts of Paul as Cestus, a centurion, I believe. But he does show up there. Very, very similar person, almost the same name, shows up in that text. And that's another way I show that there's a literary dependence on Josephus. And Saulus's flight from the Jews happening in the 60s does parallel the chronology in Acts. Because Acts reconfigures the situations in the epistles of Paul, and now the situation is happening in the 50s, 60s. And that's how you get the standard dating.
Gotcha. Someone was saying, would you read the super chats at the end, Jojo? We've been reading all of them as they've came. So we haven't missed any of them, just to make it clear. So if you have a question or a comment, feel free to super chat, but we're getting them as we go. So as far as this fracture goes, you're still on board with the consensus view, of course. It seems that Acts is written after and it's taming Paul.
Yes.
The theology is radically different. Now, one of the interesting things, you and I have interviewed Bart Ehrman before several times, and other scholars in his kind of field, the way that they think about these things. And I don't think Bart has the same view of this issue as someone like James Tabor. That is the crucifixion, a atoning theology that we see in Paul. Someone like James doesn't think that actually goes back to the Jerusalem church, that they did not have an atonement sacrificial belief in Jesus, that is a Pauline innovation. What do you think about that?
So let me see if I understand you correctly. You're saying the internal belief was later, or could you just say it again?
So yeah, the sacrifice, Christ.
The sacrifice, the atonement is later.
Yeah.
Like the idea that Jesus' death is the atonement for your sins.
Yeah. Not that they believe he might be alive after.
Right.
They could have thought he was alive after.
I remember Bart talking about that, and that the atonement is lacking in Luke.
Right.
And he talked about that, and I believe it's in one of his courses. I think it's Luke's Maverick Gospel, if I remember correctly. But anyway, yeah, I think he's correct, because when you look at First Clement,
who's correct? Because I just laid out James, Tabor, and Bart
Paul.
Ehrman. So you think that they?
I think they didn't always have the atonement. I think this is a later development.
Okay, so that would I think, and I'm not sure if Bart, correct me if I'm wrong, I know James Tabor thinks that the atoning sacrifice was not an earlier idea. That's Paul's innovation. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So you would be in line with that, is what your point is.
Yes.
Okay.
Bart himself will say it wasn't part of the original movement, but he doesn't think it's a Pauline innovation either. He thinks that it was being preached even before Paul by others, which I disagree with. So on this issue, I would definitely lean, and I would be in agreement actually with Tabor's view. Now, there's one thing I do want to specify, because there's something that I didn't mention when I talked about First Clement earlier. I don't use First Clement just by itself to determine what the original Paul believed, but I think First Clement is a major cornerstone in how I look at it. But I have another argument. It has to do with the "it is written" statements in the epistles, which may overlap with what you were talking about, the possibility that the epistles know the Gospels. There are several "it is written" statements. Rabbi Tovia Singer also addresses this and says that Paul is quoting scriptures that aren't real scriptures. These are phantom scriptures, as Tovia likes to call them. And it's interesting, but I think canonical Paul is quoting an earlier text. That's why he's saying "it is written, it is written, it is written." And one of the things that he's saying "it is written" in is in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about the 500 brothers who had seen Jesus. And he said that some of them are still with us. Now, right. I doubt that some of them were still with them when these texts were actually put together. It was way too late for that. I'll tell you what I suspect. It's going to be in my paper for Bob's Journal. I actually suspect that "it is written" statements actually goes back to the real Paul. But the text isn't telling you that. It's integrating it, removing any connection to who the author is. So you don't know who the author is. And let's say I'm right about that. Do you have a source for Zacchaeus being an author? It's in the recognitions. Epistles of Zacchaeus. It's right in there. Letters of Zacchaeus.
Do you have it on the screen?
I do not. I believe it's in book 1, chapter 72, somewhere around there. So I would look there. It's there. It's toward the end of book 1. So I do know it's there. You'll find it.
In the Pseudo-Clementines.
Yeah, Pseudo-Clementine recognitions.
Got it.
And that's important for my theory, because Zacchaeus is therefore a source for the recognitions account of the attack on James.
Gotcha. And then we have Soleranet, of course. 1 John 4, 1 John 4. Spirit of the Antichrist is denial that Jesus was a natural man. Antichrist Paul was first to say Jesus not human, a god in Acts 9:20. Spirit of the Antichrist is denial.
That's kind of confusing me, to be honest with you. I don't. What do we mean by this?
1 John 4. Yeah, so denying the incarnation, it seems like there's some who are denying the incarnation. If I'm not mistaken, Paul does think, even Richard Carrier with his celestial mythicist model suggests Jesus did take on flesh in the third heaven. So even the mythicist model that is pushed by Dr. Carrier does have this idea. But I don't know if that's what he's hinting at here. I'm not really sure. But Acts 9:22. So 1 John 4 says, "You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world." That's 1 John 4. And that maybe the whole 1 John 4 chapter, because it's on denying the incarnation. So I was thinking it was verse 4, but no, it's talking about, dear friends. Let me share my screen so we're on the same page.
Sure.
Here. Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and even now is already in the world. From my understanding of this is probably dealing with docetism, and that's usually academics like Hugo Mendez. And I think I just got his book, by the way. Did you get his book yet? The new one?
Yeah, I have his book.
Yeah, that one he gets into this. But yeah, I think this is dealing with docetism. But I wonder how he's relating this to Acts 9:20. Antichrist Paul was first to say Jesus, not human, a God in Acts 9:20. So let me look at Acts 9:20 and just see what's being said here. Acts 9. Yeah, there we go. 20. And it says, at once he began to preach in the synagogues that Jesus is the Son of God. So he's the Son of God, but there's all sorts of Son of God passages. Maybe in Acts, this is the first mention of him being the Son of God. But the idea that he is a God, not a human. I'm having a hard time tracking what Solera's argument is here.
Yeah, I don't understand. I think we should move to the next super chat.
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
Solera.
sorry.
I'm having a hard time. Paul Bustian, but I hope I'm not butchering this. I probably am.
I think it's Paul Bustian.
Bustian. Do you think Paul was lying about his vision on the road to Damascus, or hallucinating, or could he have seen a spirit, perhaps a deceitful one?
I'll give you my answer. I think canonical Paul created the vision. I don't think it ever happened in any capacity.
My opinion is, I think the Damascus Road experience is a fiction. Again, I mean, this is the road experience is described in Acts. Maybe there's some earlier tradition here. It does try to make it into visionary experiences to some degree, but even the visionary experiences, it's hard for me to not see a literary creation there, because of the examples I've seen other scholars point out about mimesis. That would be both not only Dennis MacDonald's hypothesis about this, but also Michael Koshinosh's view, and you and I have talked about this as well, Jacob. I'm pretty convinced that the Saul Paul change that happens after this conversion is a literary thing for me. I don't think that he had two names. I take the view that this is a creation by the author to portray Saul going after the seed of David, like King Saul was going after David in the Old Testament. And here he is, the very phrase in the Greek from the Old Testament, when David cries out and King Saul's asleep in the cave, Saul, Saul, why do you pursue me? Is the same thing Jesus says, the son of David says to Saul here in the Acts narrative. I think it's a fiction. And I think the blinding light may be a mimesis. Hypothetically, if you take Dennis MacDonald's view, maybe a mimesis of Pentheus in the tree spying out the Maenads when he's blinded by a bright light by Dionysus. And of course, in this case, he's not shown mercy. He's torn apart and destroyed and killed. But Jesus shows mercy where Dionysus doesn't. I'm not certain of this. I just think that this is an interesting potential mimesis connection, because when you go throughout Acts, you find all of the prison break themes that you find in Euripides' Bacchae for Dionysus. You find all of these same tropes throughout the story. So I think I think this is more of a literary invention. That is not to say maybe Paul was some mystic, but I like the literary approach. Like Richard C. Miller, when he brings in his approach, he always, he explains to me, he's like, dude, why do we always fall back on hallucination models? Why do we always fall back on these explanations and not grant, or at least bring to the table, the cult invented narrative? They're inventing stories about these things. They don't need to necessarily have actually happened. And I just think that there's so much legend making, mythic borrowing. I don't know why that's not on the table You want to bring hypothesis like hallucination models, you want to bring all that, cool, do it. No one has a problem with it. I just think it's sad that we have examples of people like Joseph Smith that are somewhat contemporaneous in comparison to Christianity, and we know they're making up stuff, and we don't play the games of like, did he really have a hallucination of the golden plates? Did he really have a hallucination of the two deities in the woods that appeared to him, the Father and the Son, the angel Moroni, all of this? Or is he just kind of making things up as he goes and crafting up a good legend, or if you will, or inventing this stuff? Why is that not on the table?
Yeah, I agree.
Why is it, you know what I mean?
I want to state that, just to be clear, I actually agree with Michael Kokonash.
Oh, do you?
But when it comes to Zacchaeus, I treat Zacchaeus talking about Saul again. What the pseudo-Clementine recognitions is quoting from him. The reason why he calling Paul Saul is for a different reason, because he's calling Paul Saul as polemic, saying you're like Saul who persecuted David. Whereas, so it's not entirely the same thing what's going on in Mike Kokonash's case in Acts. Acts takes it the next level and says that Saul became Paul, which is different from what the Recognitions is saying. The Recognitions is integrating material from Zacchaeus' letter, Zacchaeus' account of the attack on James, which I put in the first century. The Zacchaeus attacking James part, not the pseudo-Clementine Recognitions, just to be extra clear. The pseudo-Clementine Recognitions is circa 150 CE. So anyway, he's just calling Paul Saul as polemic. While as Clement, who writes Paul more positively, the original Clement of Rome, the bishop in the 90 CE, he just calls him plain old Paul, doesn't call him Saul.
Right.
So there's no name change. He's not saying, I've become this. In Acts, it reconfigures the situation. It says, Saul became Paul, purifying his past, and now he's righteous as Paul, no longer persecuting the church. Say, Saul, why do you persecute me? So that's a very different framing of how he shifts from Saul to Paul, because we don't get that at all from the Clementine writings.
Got it. Solera Knight is back. Thank you so much for the super chat. Son of God, the Virgin Mary thing. This Paul's Jesus was not human. Many still worship Jesus as God. Son of God, the Virgin Mary thing. So Virgin Mary, you're going to get that in a gospel at best that's quoting a passage about a young woman. But you can't, necessarily make the quote of the original context mean what the gospels are saying. But I think in one of the gospels, it is implying virgin, right? But that's not in Paul. Paul does talk about a heavenly mother. He doesn't mention Mary at all or a virgin thing. But I'm trying to track this. This Paul's Jesus was not human.
Solera may be confusing with some of these texts with 3rd Corinthians, which in 3rd Corinthians is a super late text, late 2nd century CE forgery that does claim that Paul knew about the virgin birth, but it's an absolute forgery. And I think everybody in all sides of scholarship agrees that letter is a forgery. Not even apologists defend it, which is telling.
But even then, there's something here that Solera is hinting at, whether or not we can't get the first part fully made out, and that is to worship Jesus as a God. The 12 would never have done that. The 12 would never, they would have never had him on a pedestal as a deity of some sort. I don't even think that they would have seen him. This is just my personal perspective. I don't think they saw him as an angel, or like Enoch is portrayed, about this, or even Daniel's portraying as the Son of Man. These are, I think, developments that happen that aren't necessarily there at the beginning.
I agree.
Paul does have him, it seems, definitely lifted up. His name is lifted up in this hymn we find in Philippians. If you grant that goes early, that, he's being deified to some extent, but he is not God. A lot of Trinitarians want to try and, capitalize on that. You know what I'm saying? But it is interesting. Christianity won out. I think Paul's message of seeing Jesus as divine in some way definitely won out. That's what I see. And I think that's ultimately what Solera's getting at, I think.
And I think that John chapter 1 is mining Philippians big time in the way it engineers the story, the prologue about the Word. It began with the Word, and the Word was Jesus. The Word was Christ, and He manifests in the flesh.
Yeah, I
just
think
like
there's a
in
hint there.
Philippians, He became a man.
Right. And I think most scholars agree that seems to be an incarnation. Whereas I know some scholars who think that's Adam theology. James Tabor, actually, with James D.G. Dunn and others, they think that it's not talking about like a pre-existent angel that becomes flesh kind of stuff, but Adam theology. And I don't want to straw man his view because I probably butchered it already. But it would be interesting to get him to spell that out a little better on what he's saying is going on there, instead of his saying he wasn't a man, but then he became a man. And then that's a lot of what pre-existent theology teaches. Jason Stewart, thank you for the super chat, my friend. It's been a while since I've seen you, I believe, super chat. I haven't seen you in a minute with that. Any link with Luke and Zacchaeus? How do you pronounce that? Zacchaeus on tree? To see over crowd, to see Jesus in letter. Zacchaeus is like an author showing Jesus over all Pauline churches crowd.
The best way I can interpret this question, because I'm having a very hard time understanding this, but I think Jason is asking me if Luke is talking about the same Zacchaeus that wrote about the attack on James being quoted in the recognitions. And I would say, yes, it is talking about him. And it's giving him a different story, because Zacchaeus in the Gospels isn't doing what's going on in the recognitions or what's being quoted about him in the recognitions. It portrays Zacchaeus very differently, I would say.
Interesting. Jason, I don't know. I don't have a clue about Zacchaeus. Barely can pronounce his name. So Paul Bustian again, thank you so much for the super chat. Do you think that Paul telling the Jews in public in Acts 22:20 that he was complicit in Stephen's murder makes that story seem probably fake?
Well, the attack on Stephen is a literary override for what Zacchaeus was talking about. Paul's attempt to, or Saul as he calls him, Paul's attempt to kill James, and he leaves him for dead. So yes, I mean, even though Paul didn't literally say those words in Acts, and that is fiction, it nevertheless is true that he was complicit in murder based on the pseudo-Clementine writings, because someone else finished the job. Read Dorotheus Attire. Dorotheus Attire is quoting Abdias of Babylon. But another man finished the attack with a fuller's club, and he brained James. I actually have that. I have that slide pulled up right here, where the finishing happens.
Let's look at it.
Yeah, I have it underlined. It's a little hard to read, but I have it underlined there in the bottom. By Saul afterwards called Paul, thrown down and having breath after his fall. One came with a fuller's club, knocked him upon the head, and brained him.
That's a new way, huh? The brained him. Don't get brained, everybody. Oof, sounds bad.
Yes. So when you put the sources together, these two different texts, yes, I would say yes, historical Paul was complicit in murder. Yes. That's what Acts is talking about. But instead, I'm sorry?
It's the tough stuff.
Yeah. Acts shifts the situation, says, no, that wasn't James, that was Stephen. Because you can see why they did that. You do not want Paul attacking James. That's self-defeating to the entire narrative Acts is concocting.
So again, what is the strongest off the top of your head? We didn't plan this, but you might already know. What is the strongest evidence in your view that James is Stephen in Acts?
Because of the participation of Paul in both deaths. Because Acts the Clementine writings has one, Acts has a different one.
Right.
It's not like that.
The Clementine one say, because we know what Acts says. Everyone's read the New Testament.
Yeah.
Stephen, he's giving approval. He's there. And as we just saw, just so that people could see it again, let me take yours, remove, and then add to stage. Again, just so people could see, this is later. The stoning of Stephen takes place, I think, in Acts 5 or somewhere. But when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Which chapter is it that Stephen gets martyred in again? In it 5?
Acts,
or is it?
yeah.
Ananias, the apostles hail many, persecuted, Sanhedrin. Look, the men you're put in jail are standing in the temple courts teaching the people. I think they had a prison break, probably. I don't know. I can't remember if this is one of them. Gamaliel. Then you have that mistake that they copied Josephus from. I didn't see it there. Is it in the next one? The choosing of the 7. Stephen seized. Okay, Stephen, a man full of God's grace. Got it. From members of the synagogue. So they stirred up the people. Okay, so we know he gets stoned to death here. And he says, I saw Jesus seated at the right hand of God. All of that. What is it that gives a clue in the other material as to why Paul is killing James in this? Do you have that off the top of your head, or?
I'm just trying to check something real fast.
Okay, feel free.
You notice that Saul in Acts 8:1 it says Saul, it uses the name Saul, not Paul. It's very important. Saul wholeheartedly approved of their killing him.
That's 8:1.
So Saul was there giving approval. So it's not using the word. It's not using Paul. He hasn't shifted yet. He's Saul right now. That's because in Zacchaeus' writing, he's also using Saul when he attacks James. That's one of my star evidence right there.
Can we pull up that source, that Zacchaeus source, just to show people on screen, or is that possible? Do you have that prepared or not right now?
I can if you just give me 1 second, I can get it ready really fast, because I have the entire Clementine recognitions in my computer. So
got it.
Moments.
No worries, no rush. Hey, look, I'll address the next one. Solera Knight sent another super chat. Thank you so much for the super chat. Is Jesus worship idolatry? Clearly, I would say within Judaism, yeah. I would imagine, but it gets messy because a lot of these scholars that are reading the Gospels will say Jesus was the bearer of God's image on earth as a human, and that he wasn't God, but was sent by his Father, yet he receives worship. And this is why it's a mess, and Trinitarians love to capitalize on Jesus being worshipped in this way. I imagine Unitarians might do it as well. But clearly, if you're going down the path that there's one God, if you're going down the path that there's one God and Jesus is obviously a son of that God, he's not that God himself, I don't see why that wouldn't be. Oh, hold on. Missed you as well, Derek. Hope you are well. Jason, much better now, and missed you too. I'm glad I'm back in this saddle. Okay. We do have one more super chat after that, but let's get to it. Let's first let's look at your quote here.
This is 2 chapters after it mentions that Saul attacked James. Well, therefore we abode in Jericho. I'm just going to read the first sentence. While wherefore we abode in Jericho and gave ourselves to prayer and fasting, James the bishop sent for me and sent me here to Caesarea, saying that Zacchaeus had written to him from Caesarea that one Simon, a Samaritan magician, was subverting many of our people, asserting that he was one stands, that is, in other words, the Christ, in the great power of the high God, which is superior to the creator of the world. At the same time, but he showed many miracles and made some doubt, and others fall away to him. So the Recognitions is using this text and integrating it into its historical fiction, into its narrative, but is essentially saying that it is getting its information that's been getting lately from Zacchaeus' correspondence. And so Acts, which is not using our Recognitions, of course, it's using that earlier material that Recognitions is talking about and also making use of, to reframe the situation as if it's the attack on Stephen rather than an attack on James.
But where's the attack of James in here? It's not in this text?
No. He's saying here that he's talking about letters of Zacchaeus, which is two chapters. It's very close to the attack on James. It's just after. That's my point. It's telling you that it's getting its background information about this. Because notice it talks about James and Zacchaeus and James are writing to each other. That's my point. So he's giving a wink there that, okay, I'm actually getting my stuff from text. I wasn't there when it happened. I wasn't a contemporary. I am putting myself in the story. That's what he's doing. He's inserting himself into the past. That's the historical fiction. He's pretending to live in that time. But in reality, he's actually mining his information from letters and putting himself around it.
Okay, got it. Jimmy Thompson, thanks for the super chat. Was John the Baptist probably a separate apocalyptic preacher that had nothing to do with Jesus, and writers made it to fit the Jesus narrative? I don't know. I tend to just think, look, it looks like Jesus got baptized by John the Baptist. Even though I love listening to all the different positions about this, that they're two different movements, and that, you know, when you're writing material and you're trying to get those John the Baptist followers to come join your movement, you might write a story where your guy gets baptized by him. But notice even the earliest baptism scene with John in it, John still goes above and beyond to, like, in this text in Mark. Let's go to Mark real quick. We might as well pull it up because if you look carefully, even in the earliest gospel, which is the first time this gets mentioned, you'll notice that while Mark's cool with Jesus being baptized for the remission of sins, because clearly it wasn't problematic to this author, John still goes above and beyond to act like, I'm not worthy. Okay. Like, this guy is much more, right? So we know the story in the beginning, good news about Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it's written in the Isaiah prophet. And it's not just written by Isaiah. He's quoting a composite text here of two different prophets. Isaiah is one of them, but I think Malachi is the other one. John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. The whole Judean countryside and all the people of Jerusalem went out to him, confessing their sins. They were baptized by him in the Jordan River. John wore clothing made by camel's hair with a leather belt. Let me try to find. Okay, says, and this was his message, right? After me comes the one more powerful than I, the straps of whose sandals I'm not worthy to stoop down and untie. I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. In the earliest mention ever about any of this, that sounds a bit much to me. I doubt John the Baptist would ever say something like that. He would have been the teacher. He would have been the man above Jesus. So Jesus would have been subordinate to this guy. If there was any historical evidence here that Jesus really went and got baptized, I can't imagine John the Baptist saying, there is one that is, I'm not even worthy to untie his sandal. Like, come on, bro. So this is why it opens the door for me on being, willing to say, is it possible? Two different movements. This is a way to get them to come together and patch them together. Maybe Bob Price might argue something like that. But then you have to think about what James Tabor mentions about in other places where the Gospels say that Jesus says, of men born, there's none greater. Men born of women, there's none greater than John. And he's talking about John the Baptist. Well, hold on, Jesus. You were born of a woman. You're saying John's greater than yourself? So, like, it's a mess, man. It's a mess to know what
Here's
the truth is.
Part. The Gospel of Thomas, not just the Coptic version, but the one that I'm reconstructing based on the Oxyrhynchus papyri and the Pseudo-Clementine recognition citations of it. John is implied in the text to be a successor, not a predecessor to Jesus, but not just a predecessor to Jesus, but a successor, excuse me, not just a successor to Jesus, but also to James. And
John the Baptist?
Yes. And Josephus. Well, and that actually lines up with Josephus. It lines up with Josephus because Josephus puts John's death after Jesus.
Hold on.
And that's one of the reasons why Samuel Zinner thinks that the testimonium is authentic, because he says, well, why would you insert that? Why would you put Jesus's death before John? And I totally agree. That makes sense. That doesn't make any sense. In the Gospels, what you were just reading there is making John subordinate to Jesus. Like, Jesus is better than me in every possible. Right. I'm unworthy to untie his shoelaces. I mean, come on. So it's trying to make trying to make John totally subordinate to Jesus.
Right.
When in reality, if you go to Thomas, the original one, not the Coptic one, which contradicts itself, and which the Recognitions knows about half. I'm serious. The Clementine Recognitions knows half of a verse in Thomas, and not the other half that contradicts the other half. Because in Thomas, it talks about John is greater than all born of a woman. But here's how you become greater than John. Like, wait a minute, you just said he's greater than all born of a woman. And the Recognitions only quotes the first half, not the second half. So it doesn't know the same version of Thomas that we have. So that's my point. In Thomas, John is greater than everybody. And there'll be none greater than John. And that fits Josephus. John's after Jesus.
I just wanted to see. I'm like, okay, where is this at? So, Antiquities of the Jews, right?
Yeah.
I've got it here. Big ass book here. Let's go to 18 here. Bear with me 1 second. It talks about the death of Josephus or John the Baptist. 18, book 18, chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. Book 18, chapter 5, verses 1 through 2. And it ultimately says that he died under Herod Antipas.
Yes.
And to the military conflict with Aretes the fourth of Nabatea, Antipas divorced Aretes' daughter to marry Herodias, which triggered the war. Josephus says that when Antipas' army was destroyed by Aretes, many Jews believed the defeat was divine punishment for killing John. That military defeat is generally dated to around 36 CE. This means Josephus' narrative places John's death sometime shortly before 36, likely around 34 to 36, depending on how you read the sequence. The problem is obvious. The Gospels place John's arrest and execution early in Jesus' ministry, typically around 28 to 30 CE,
Not
which
20, exactly.
since Jesus' crucifixion is usually dated to 30 or to 33 CE, if Josephus is right and John died closer to 35 to 36, that's a gap of 5 to 7 years, and it raises serious questions about the gospel chronology tying John's imprisonment to the launch of Jesus' public ministry.
There's probably something else in here.
Yeah,
Sorry if I
one more
cut you
thing
off.
real quick.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
fine.
go ahead.
Nikos Kokonos has done detailed work. I guess this is an academic who's written on this. Detailed work on this chronological tension. Some scholars resolve it by arguing Antipas imprisoned John much earlier than the Aretas War, but Josephus' narrative pretty clearly treats the execution and the war as closely linked events. Sorry, go ahead.
That doesn't make sense to me, John. I agree what they're saying and what you just said there, the latter part, that yes, John died around that time, about 36 CE, and that's the reason why that war was thought of being an immediate judgment by God, or at least a near immediate judgment, wrath for what he had done to poor John. And the other thing is, the significant thing here is the absence of any connection of Jesus and John. John does not baptize Jesus in Josephus' text. In fact, they're neither one. Not one does not baptize the other. So
exactly.
that is one of the reasons why I don't think the baptism happened. I'm not convinced. Because if it did, why would Josephus leave that connection out? He loves connecting characters together like that, but he doesn't connect them together here.
Yeah, you would think if stories are floating around, and the argument about the testimonium, I don't want to get lost in that, but
I know.
You would think, I agree with you. Like, you would think that he would have done more to say, look, this is a follower of that guy, or he got baptized by this guy, the one called the Christ. The same way you see later with him, James, who brother of the so-called Christ, or the one called Christ. Like, you would think more connections would be made. Good question, Jimmy. You're the man. Great question. Next one is Doc Pluroma in the house. Good to see you, Doc. Been a minute. Acts diffuses early Jerusalem volatility by splitting one temple controversial leader into two. Stephen takes the radical temple polemic and martyrdom, while James is recast as the stabilizing pillar. You want to comment on that?
Well, yes, I agree. It fits in with what I was saying earlier, that James has been replaced by Stephen.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're not only taming Paul. They're not just taming Paul. They're taming. They're trying to resolve the tension between James and Paul in this situation. If you grant your position that a historical Paul may have actually killed James or been behind it, and they're doing something here to recast the situation, it seems.
Exactly, because again, the Acts is trying to reframe Paul as not really being in conflict. That would be contradicted if you admit that, oh, Saul killed James, the brother of Jesus. We can't have that. Someone
Dude,
else has got to go in his place. We can't have that.
this is so problematic, bro. I mean, like, if you're right
They'll
that Saul killed
go ahead.
James, if you're right about that, I mean, just imagine like how insane the whole thing would be. Like, this guy killed this guy, and then like Christianity found a way to like put a band-aid over the most Jerry Springer conflict at the very beginning of their movement. Let's just band-aid over that this guy killed, murdered this guy, but we're gonna make them, you know, work it out in our story. That's pretty wild, bro.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't make sense to me when some try to rescue the situation and say, no, 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 pseudo Clementine. They have this gibberish, incoherent idea that pseudo Clementine recognitions is just post Acts polemic against Paul. I'm like, no. Why would somebody make this stuff up? That doesn't make any sense. The fact that Acts even has to talk about Paul being as Saul, that's the important thing. To try to, it's like it's already trying to obscure something. Because who's
There's
this
already
random
something.
Stephen?
Right.
Who is that?
Right.
That doesn't make any sense. But if it's about James, it makes total sense. And then Galatians, before Acts even gets on the scene, Galatians is already trying to sanitize. It's like, oh, it's just an argument. And James kind of shows up there just a little bit, but it's mostly between Paul and Cephas. We'll keep James largely out of this. I'm like, what is going on here? Well, it's this. It's Zacchaeus' letters. That was the problem. It was circulating. They couldn't get rid of it. And that was a problem.
Dude, that's even if you can't go as far as saying Paul killed James, if it's hinting that he killed Stephen, I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Well, technically, he didn't kill him. He said he's complicit in his death. He tried to kill him. Then somebody else as part of his mob killed him, but still.
Got it. Okay.
But
yes, let me be careful.
It's still bad.
Careful. It's still ugly as hell. And then it's like,
it is.
It's almost like, look, I get it. People make mistakes, right? But could you like think about the guy who murdered someone of your family or a friend of yours or something? Like that tension is already spelled there very early on in Acts. So even if you try to say, well, I think this is more propaganda later, there might be some of that in the pseudo Clementines, clearly, but like they're not working out of ex nihilo thin air. It's not like they just made it up.
Right. Look at the important element, what they have in common.
What they have in common is,
Yeah. So
now let me. No, you please go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, notice what they both have in common. It's not Saul finishing the job. It's others or some other. Saul attacks James, but he doesn't finish the job. It's somebody else in the recognitions. And Acts, he merely stands there and approve of his death. You see, they have a lot of thematic overlap. The wording is so airtight.
Right.
It's hard to separate them.
The problem is he got saved and changed his mind, Jacob. Trust him. The Holy Spirit changed him, bro. I'm teasing with you. No, but you know, one thing that is interesting, and I don't know how to pull this thread myself and unravel how to make sense of this, but in Greek, the word theomakoi gets used throughout Acts, especially with Gamaliel, when he stands up and gives his speech, which I don't think he did that at all. I think they made that up.
Fiction.
Yeah, but he mentions that if you fight against this movement after he mentions Theudas and Judas the Galilean, you'd be fighting against God. If they are, of course, a movement that'll survive, if you fight against this movement and they are of God, you're fighting against God. Theomakoi. You're a God fighter. In Greek, God fighter, theomakoi. This same exact term, as I was mentioning with Dennis MacDonald's material earlier with Euripides, is exactly what we find within the tradition of the Dionysus, Maenad, satyrs, Dionysus tradition with the cult followers of him. In Euripides, Pentheus is fighting. He's a theomakoi. He's fighting against a god, a demigod, a figure who's the son of Zeus. And you get this in other, like the Homeric hymn to Dionysus. You get this in Hesiod, I believe, mentions it in a narration about Dionysus. There's so much material about god fighters fighting against the cult of Dionysus, and the same Greek word gets used. So, what if it's all written and made up? I'm just throwing it out there that it's still not helpful because if people take this stuff literally, it still doesn't work good, right? Most people will read this and thinking, oh, there's something there. It doesn't look good for your, in my opinion, for your movement at the start. And this is one of the main places a lot of apologists go to, and they go, listen, it must be from God because this guy who was trying to kill them all had a change of heart. Why would he have a change of heart if it wasn't God who really made him change his heart? Right? I am much more prone to be cautious and just skeptical and say, hold on, this might be just literary. But if this guy did change his heart and we take this all literally, that's like pretending that people who don't commit, say like prison guards, they've done a study on like people in modern times, prison guards who are harsh on inmates, eventually often bend to the inmates, you know, they empathize with the people that are in these cages, these human beings that they're treating like crap. Eventually they end up becoming someone who sides with them over time. And that's something that can happen. But anyway, I just wonder how much of it's fiction, man. That's all I'm saying. How much of this is fiction, bro?
Well, all I have to say about that is I think the big problem with trying to rescue the conversion narrative is first Clement's ignorance. Clement not talking about that. That's a really big problem. And since he is quoting material that would later end up in First Corinthians, that makes it even worse. So he knows about material that eventually becomes part of the Corinthian correspondence, as it is, of course, later expanded and forged shortly after Clement's death. And so that's the problem. He doesn't really know about this. This conversion, that's why it really seems to me like this conversion is a canonical creation, which later gets expanded in Acts.
Got it. Huh. It's still fun to do. Doc, you're the man. Thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Jason is back. Jason Stewart, 7834. Thank you again, my friend. Did you know Jews fast 9th of Tevet yearly to remember Peter? Also, the prayer of Peter every Shabbat, Nishmat. They think he was a spy. Ask Tovia. You know about this?
I remember something like that vaguely. Yes. I don't know why they think that. Huh. But I heard something about this before. But I just didn't pay much attention to it. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know much about it.
Yeah, let me do something here. I hate leaving super chatters hanging, but I'm going to run this through. Look, man, right now, I think the going model AI, if you're into the AI stuff, is Claude.ai Opus 4.6.
Oh, yeah, and
great. This one's pretty good. No matter what you do, always double check sources.
Absolutely.
But I am just throwing it in there to have it read it real quick. I took the screenshot of the super chat. Let's just see what it does. I'm curious. I'm curious. Do you want me to share the screen so you can see it with me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me do that. Let's just see what happens with this Paul's reinterpretation. Okay, this is really interesting comment. It's referencing real Jewish traditions, though they come from the medieval sources, not antiquity.
Is it possible to zoom in on that? It's very small.
Yes, it is.
A little more.
Why does it keep?
That's much better. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So it's saying this is medieval sources, not antiquity, right? The 9th of Tevet, the commenter is right that there is a fast on the 9th of Tevet, though it's a minor fast overshadowed by the 10th of Tevet, commemorating Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem. The reason for the 9th of Tevet fast is listed as unknown in some sources like Shulchan Aruch, but certain medieval Jewish traditions connect it to events involving early Christian figures. Some sources associate it with the death of Ezra and Nehemiah, but the commenter is referencing an alternative tradition, the Nishmat prayer and Peter as a spy. This is where it gets fascinating. There's a medieval Jewish tradition found in texts like Machzor Vitri, 11th century, and related sources that attributes the Nishmat Kol Chai, the breath of every living thing, a major Shabbat prayer still recited in synagogues today, to Shimon Kefa, Simon Peter. What? What's going on in here, bro? The story goes like this. Peter wasn't actually a Christian at all. Oh, snap. We got to pull on this yarn, dude. I imagine this could play into, I mean, I know this is late, but who knows? What if this does have some like early memory of this split,
You
right?
know what it feels like to me?
Huh.
It feels like a total inversion. This is my Ante-Nicene Fathers Volume 8 copy. This is where this has the Clementine literature in it.
Let me do that again. Do that again. Your full screen. Everybody wants to see that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there is a little letter in here about it's a letter of James to Peter and Peter to James. And in it, they're talking about how my words are being corrupted. And they're talking about an enemy that in the way they're talking about him, it's like they're being infiltrated. So it's like it's taking that what they're talking about there and turning it on its head, saying, no, they're not talking about someone infiltrating. It's not someone else, it's really Peter himself that's doing it. So it's like they're inverting what the pseudo-Clementine literature is saying. That's what this sounds like to me.
Interesting, Jason. I don't know. Maybe worth pulling on the thread. Maybe they just made it up later. I mean, you got to imagine at this time too, Christians and Jews, and by this time, likely Muslims, there's stuff going on. There's so much mishmash stuff by medieval period, but it's still fun. It's still cool to see how traditions might have earlier memory.
It sounds similar enough to what's being talked about in the pseudo-Clementine Peter James correspondence that it seems like to me it's a corruption of what they were talking about there. It's an inversion.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Jason, thanks for the super chat.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Doc Pleuromonada is back again. Paul is antithetical to Qumran's ethic. Any merit to the theory he was a failed Herodian convert, maybe even the liar in 1QP Habakkuk, I believe it is.
That comes from Eisenman.
His views clash so hard with the righteous one, it feels personal.
Yeah. I already addressed this in a way earlier when I talked about that. Those ideas that he's a Herodian, those elements were taken from canonical Paul's use of Josephus. So all of those elements come from using Josephus. Now, that is not to say that the actual historical Paul in the 30 CE, the original one, the one that attacked James, because that's when he lived. That's the height of his lifetime. That's the final decade of his life. Paul, both Paul, the original, the OG, and canonical Paul, as far as I'm concerned, no matter which version you stick with, they are all antithetical to Qumran's ethic. No matter which version you're going with, in one way or the other. Now, with the original Paul, when you look at the recognitions and the material that he's quoting from Zacchaeus, he seems to be working with the high priest Caiaphas. And Caiaphas is trying to hunt these people down. And Caiaphas was part of the pro-Roman movement in the government. People that were like, no, don't cause trouble for the Romans. And because Pilate and Caiaphas were both removed from power at the same time in about 37 CE. So Pilate was removed, Caiaphas was removed, and it's obvious why both were removed, because the Romans thought they were being too extreme in what they were doing and persecuting and putting down rebellions. Because Pilate was being criticized for one massacre after another. Just read Philo, read Josephus. They're very, very critical of Pilate. So them both being removed at the same time, not a coincidence. They were cleaning house. They wanted to put people they thought were better in charge in their place.
Interesting. God, there's so much here. Doc, I don't have anything to say. I just know that, as you know, there's several scholars who would probably give pushback on trying to say that the liar in that Qumran text is Paul.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting to find out that when you have cult movements of people and followers, you're going to have people who are probably going to call people liars, and you get that all throughout the New Testament. Watch out for the antichrists. For the liars and all that kind of stuff. There's going to be tons of that material.
I'm with the consensus on when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls. I do not agree with Eisenman. I think that, but the problem is the Damascus document. Like, it's pretty clear to me that's putting the righteous teacher in the 2nd century BC. I know some people that want to defend radical views like Eisman will try to dance around it or challenge or try to play calendar games with me. But I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I'm not buying it. Not for 2 seconds.
It's still interesting, though.
It
I
is.
mean, you don't have to draw Eisenman's conclusion that this is Paul. It's interesting to just find out that Jewish movements clearly have people of light, people of darkness, liars, and righteous ones throwing that around. And who knows? The tradition may just be continuing on an in-group, out-group, debate and arguments
Sure.
about they're not like us is still
Yeah.
going on in the first century, but it already started way back here. Solera Knight, thank you so much for the super chat. Peter was a Yahwish. I think they mean a Yahwist, I imagine.
I mean, if he's a Torah Orthodox Jew, that would kind of go without saying.
Yeah, that's obvious
I
for
don't know
sure.
I don't know how else to trust that.
Yeah, no, I think that's for sure. But maybe they're referring to this this comment by Jason. Again, Jason, thank you for the super chat. Tovia Singer believes this. I think the spy is Paul. So again, just bringing that Claude back up, you'll notice it says it's Peter, right? The prayers for Peter. The prayers for Peter, as you see, and all that, and that Peter wasn't actually a Christian at all. He ends up being a secret agent sent by the rabbis to infiltrate the early Christian movement and create a clear separation between Judaism and Christianity. That seems to have the wrong guy, though, right? Because you would think,
well,
it's Paul.
Well, here's what's funny. It's the inversion. That's what I just said earlier. It's an inversion of the pseudo-Clementine literature. Because if you look at the pseudo-Clementine literature, who's Paul working for? He's the one working for the high priest. Saul's working for the high priest, so he's hunting down James. So
I'm just gonna say in the pseudo Clementine, is it Intine literature? What, a spy? Is that a fair way to?
no,
to
I don't. I think it's going to say no and get confused. I think it's going to say working for Caiaphas, and I still don't know if it's going to say yes to that because it's the way Caiaphas reacts to the situation after James is attacked. But I'm getting the inference. You've forgotten A before the I. It's another A.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. There you go.
Or acting like this. I guess the way I'd want to phrase this is working for Caiaphas, or acting like this. This source is like this source mentioning Peter as a spy. Am I saying that right? Yeah, mentioning Peter as a spy. Question mark. I'm just gonna see what it says.
They asked us to. No, never mind. You put it in.
AI will figure it out. It'll chop it up. This is Opus 4.6. So let's see what it says. We're recalling pseudo-Clementine portrayals of Paul's allegiances, but hopefully it'll be able to kind of figure out, okay, hold on, there is a problem, it'll figure it out. It's pretty smart, this model here. Great question. The answer is really important for the Paul stream because pseudo-Clementine literature gives us what may be the oldest surviving Jewish Christian perspective on Paul, and it's brutal. Paul is an agent of the high priest in pseudo-Clementine recognitions, literally the sources you brought up, I think.
Yes, that is right.
Yeah, there's a dramatic scene set in the Jerusalem temple. James the Just is publicly debating and winning over the crowds. Then an unnamed enemy, Inimicus Homo, the enemy man. Yeah, rushes in, creates a riot, physically attacks James, throws him down the temple steps. James survives but is injured and then heads off to Damascus carrying letters from the high priest to persecute the followers of Jesus.
See that? The high priest is ordering, that's my point, the persecution of the followers of Jesus. AI is even agreeing with me there.
Right? That figure is universally identified by scholars as Saul Paul. The details map directly onto Acts 9:1-2, where Saul goes to Damascus with letters from the high priest. But the pseudo-Clementines add the violent physical assault on James, something Acts completely omits.
So look at that. So yes, in this tradition, Paul is explicitly acting as an agent of the high priestly establishment. The Caiaphas and Annas power structure in Jerusalem.
Oh, snap. So dude, this is crazy, bro.
Yeah, that's what I said.
This is just wild.
Pretty much.
Isn't that just wild? Gosh, that's wild. Oh, we got a super chat. Fish in a tie. Thank you for super chatting. Toledet Yeshu is a Jewish polemic. Do not trust it.
I'm not using it. I'm not using that at all. I know that's a super, super ultra late text. I'm not using that.
Yeah.
I'm not getting any of my information from that.
Yeah, you're just ultimately saying, and I believe you're trying to make the point, is that there seems to be a changing of the tradition, obviously in the Toledet Yeshu, but it also still stems from an earlier, older
all
tradition.
the text I'm using, even the final version of the recognitions, is way older than the Toledet Yeshu. That's how late the Toledet Yeshu is. It's like late first millennium CE.
Got it.
Super late.
Got it.
I think it would be crazy for anyone to use that thing as a source for history.
Yeah, Claude was using it, but Claude was using it because it goes on to say, right? It mentions it here, but it's not trying to act like that's what the recognitions
No,
are saying.
I can tell that it's primarily using the recognitions and sticking to it. It's not really using the Toledet.
Yeah, not in this section. Above, in the previous stuff that the commenter brought up, that was where it was bringing that up, because that's the Jewish material.
He wasn't paying attention to you scrolling down, because we were passing that up to the other.
Or maybe I Fish in the Tide was actually just referencing this tradition and not mentioning the pseudo. I think I might be late to his super chat.
That is what I think, that he just wasn't paying attention to when we were scrolling.
I apologize. Down. Yeah, I apologize. I Fish in the Tide. I thought that's what I thought. So again, we're wanting to be, on the same page here. Okay. Yeah, dude, this is crazy, bro. I'm not gonna lie. This is pretty wild stuff. And I think that beef, scholars who try to patch over that and just pretend, well, when Galatians had them argue and Paul says to his face, you hypocrite, soon as they come, the Jews come, you separated from the Gentiles, or James sending spies, or his saying in 2 Corinthians, those super apostles. We have constant struggle, beef, it seems, going on right there at the outset. They just want to patch it over because, well, just read 2 Peter. Why don't you just read 2 Peter, where he talks about, my brother Paul, he's hard to understand. We're on the same page. We agree on everything. Like, come on. That sounds like a late Acts style document that's trying to make them get along and not an earlier memory.
And what Zacchaeus looks like is stage 1, the beginning. We are extreme enemies. We are physically fighting each other. That's what you see in the recognition. It's violent. Whereas it gets less violent, it gets argumentative, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're all in agreement. We're all hugging each other. We're all friends here at stage 3, which is La La Land. Ridiculous. Like, oh, there's no fight. Who cares?
Oh, gosh.
Bygones be bygones.
Yeah, Steve says Paul is multiple people, right?
Well, it's the way I look at it is you have different individuals that are altering the original Paul's life. Paul's being rebooted. It's like it's not the best example, but I'll give an analogy. It's like somebody rebooting a science fiction several times, or somebody doing multiple different reboots of X-Men and putting them in different time periods. That's kind of what's going on. So Paul's just getting reboot, one historical fictional reboot after the other. Acts reboots Paul, gives him a life, doesn't really care about Paul's letters, so it doesn't talk about him writing those letters. He just talks about a different version, different take of his life.
So I mean, it's a reboot. I do think Acts knows Paul's letters. I mean, you may not.
I do.
Oh, you do? Okay. He just
That's why I was saying earlier. I did say earlier, but Acts actually knows Paul's letters but doesn't mention them. That's what I said.
Got it.
I did say at the beginning, but I disagree with some who claim that the letters post-date Acts.
Got it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, look, Paul's multiple people, and the fact that they reboot him, they paint him in a different picture, but Jesus is multiple people too. Just read each gospel. You'll get a different in a way, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there. And then, of course, if you read Paul's version of Jesus as Christ in heaven, that's a whole nother kind of Jesus that you're engaging versus the earthly one who's teaching the 12. You have different Jesuses. You have different Peters. You know what I mean? You have all sorts of stuff, different kinds of James, it seems. I don't know. There's more consistency, I would say, with James, at least with his letter and what we see in Acts. That seems more consistent. Peter's not, because Peter goes to the Gentiles before Paul does in Acts. Peter's not the one sent to the Gentiles, according to Galatians. So which is it, dude? Is Peter on his mission to the Gentiles, or is it Paul? And so I think they have Peter do it first to tame Paul, because Paul clearly is a problem for whatever the early group is trying to accomplish. And probably by that period, people like Marcion are coming along with radical views that they don't like. We got to work on this. I imagine.
I think in 97 CE, when Saul of Giscala, the person that I think wrote the canonical letters along with Timothy, Silas, and Sophanes, and Tertius, he's putting these letters together. Then you have James, and James. What's interesting about James is that Epiphanius puts A. James as a contemporary in the 90s with Corinthus, a so-called early heretic. And I think they're putting these letters together to try to harmonize. They're trying to put themselves they're stepping into the shoes of the earlier Paul and James and Peter. It's like they're trying to retroject their theological conflict, their argumentation into the past. And they're doing this to sanitize the past. Like, to them, they're going to be like, we're going to deal with two problems with one answer. And we're going to, by putting ourselves in the literature back into the past, we get rid of one problem. We get rid of Paul attacking James, and we replace it with our argumentation. So that way it makes it look like that our arguments go all the way back 60 years earlier. It goes back to the 30 CE. So they deal with two problems with a single stroke. And that's what they did. That's what I think they did.
Look, I gotta shamelessly plug our friend here, James Tabor, because those who don't know, he did a course, and this course really, I think by the time you finish this, you could see that, right? Is that up? Yeah.
Yeah, I see it.
Now the words might be small for the viewer. I could zoom in.
It's pretty good.
Is it? Okay, I'll zoom in.
Yeah, that's good enough.
So it turns into a 16-part lecture series, and then we got bonus included material in this course. But he also is doing 6 Zooms, right, with students. And I mean, bro, he's checking off all the boxes. Like, James is going through so much material that, and this is James the Just you're looking at right here. This is the 1st century James right there on the far right of this thumbnail right here. But I love his teaching style, his down-to-earth way, and how he breaks down what's going on. And he believes there is a division, there is a rift. And so we were thinking of a title, and of course, James is the one who has the final say on anything. And he's like, dude, what about Christianity before Paul? And I'm like, that makes perfect sense. He goes, no matter what title we come up with, it's going to be a problem, right? What Jesus Judaism movement? I mean, like, what are you going to call it, right? Well, it's before Paul, and it's kind of funny because it's not really Christianity. It's a form of Judaism, apocalyptic Judaism. And he goes through all of these. I pinned the course at the top in the comment section. Jacob, you pinned it at the top and put in the description?
I did. So my affiliate link is down there too for anyone that wants to purchase the course.
Yeah. Go get he's still doing Zooms right now. I think he's got like 3 or 4 more left at least. And so when you sign up for this course, you're not only helping us out on doing what we're doing to bring education, you're supporting a good scholar, a great scholar, James Tabor, but also you get to join him on the Zooms. And if you can't make those Zoom meetings, you can watch them later. So I definitely hope people will check those out. You'll end up being on the email list, of course, as well. Whenever we launch stuff, you'll get notified of any new scholarly courses and stuff like that. I just figured I'd do a shameless plug for our friend here, because the whole topic we're doing is Paul separated from Jesus and the 12, and he goes in on that issue. 10 1-hour lectures. So it's like whole hour each. So you're getting 10 hours of material plus the Zoom meetings where you get to hang out with him. And I think he's taking Q&A and all of that stuff there. So anyway, I wanted to do a shameless plug for him because he puts so much work in, and he's one of the few scholars that actually does follow-ups and cares about the students. That's one of the things I love about James. When he retired from Charlotte, he didn't stop teaching. Like, he's still a professor. He's still doing this with his students online. And I just think it's awesome. Anyway, shameless plug. I just felt like it was the perfect timing. Oh, look. I Fish in the Tie is literally there at the front row seat. We have had 2 Zooms, at least 4 left. So got to go check it out. Gotta go. I binged this course in a week. So it's a good course, I'm telling you. Anyway, so anything from you, Jacob? Because I feel like we could go on and on, obviously.
Right.
I want to make sure we cover everything, though, that you wanted to cover, because this is a dual stream.
Right.
Before we wrap
I think
things
I
up.
did, actually. I think I did. Don't really have much more to add.
Yeah, so look out for your paper, I guess, right? Because you're gonna.
Yes.
This is gonna be good. It's big news.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people will see a problem with First Clement. First Clement is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's evidence that Paul wrote something that's genuine. On the other hand, you can't know much about it. And he seems to have died a lot earlier in time than people think. Way before 66 CE. I actually think he died around 39 CE. I rely on Zacchaeus's letters to get that precise. Now, I'm not saying that Zacchaeus is that precise, but it's I suppose you could say it's the best guess I can come up with. But one way or the other, he did die way before 66 CE. That I can say with certainty. The idea he died under Nero is it's spinning off of Josephus about Solus and his brother Gustavus appearing before Emperor Nero. It's not real history. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Great show, Jacob. Hypatia.
Thank you.
I don't know if Hypatia is the same person who told me that I had them blocked. And I
think it is. I think I remember that.
Hypatia, I don't see your name on any of the lists that says that you're blocked. I don't understand that. That's so weird. So I don't know what's going on with that. I've looked, you know how you can look and see names that are blocked. I don't understand. So I do think you did great today, Jacob. I really enjoyed learning with you and from you. It's really, really interesting to think about these things. You know, we're not dogmatic, but some clues seem to hint at stuff that makes us go, what's something's happening, something big, you know?
Yeah, I enjoyed this conversation too. Really, really glad to be here. This was fun.
Yeah, we're gonna do more, and we might as well shamelessly plug too. We have let me shamelessly plug you real quick to my audience. If you haven't and you're watching Myth Vision, go subscribe to History Valley. Go show some love to our content creators here who are bringing you scholarship after scholarship. I mean, just there's so many academics Jacob brings on all the time, interview after interview. You have way more than I do in terms of scholar varieties, and I'm looking up to you at this point to try and get more names, new scholars, different academics, along with the ones we already have created relationships with. So be sure to subscribe to History Valley. If you haven't already, I'm going to put that in the chat right now. So if you're watching this later, you can look over in the comment section and be able to see on your computers. I'm not sure if it works on phones, but I just put it in the chat so everybody can go to YouTube, look up History Valley. Go subscribe to him. And then the final plug I'd like to make would be our episode that we're going to do, which we've already set up. And on my or your channel, I just want to mention it, where later on we are going to go through some information on Ishkur, which is this interesting god live. Let's go to live. I got a bunch of live set up too. So tomorrow I'm going live at 5 p.m. Day after, same thing. But you and me will be going over this god Ishkur turning into Yahweh. Here it is. And yeah, this one right here. Just a storm god. Stay tuned. Right?
Yep.
Anyway, Jacob, love you. Love you, man. Thank you for coming on and hanging out with me.
Man.
Absolutely, man. Any final words?
No, that's it. Nice.
Stay tuned. Look, don't mind my outro. My outro is showing up on History Valley, but it's just something to let you enjoy at the final scene here. Jacob, until next time, man. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Derek.
Have a good one.
You too.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.